Hello and welcome to this episode of Pittsburgh Sports Memories. Today on our podcast, we'll be covering the 2004 Steelers season. It's a memorable season. It's probably one of it's the best record the Steelers have ever had in the regular season, but it had a very disappointing ending, but a lot of twists and turns and good football played. And, even though it has a kind of a downer ending, I think it's a good one to review because it was a lot of fun, and I remember it. Probably one of my favorite seasons, even though it didn't come out as well as we all had wanted. And Tim's with me today, as usual.
Hello.
We go back to 2003 as usual to give you some background. The season before, the team had a disappointing 6-10 record, and that was the worst record at Heinz Field. That's the last time the team has lost more than 8 games as of today, 2020. Also, the team did not win any back-to-back games that entire season. I remember it was a pretty downer year. Like, people were giving their tickets away. I remember me and Tim it was me and Dave went to a game. My friend Dave, who helps us produce the show, went to a game against San Diego. And San Diego wasn't all that great yet. They were kind of heading into when they got pretty good, but they had Drew Brees and Doug Flutie and LaDainian Tomlinson. And amazingly, the Steelers still won that game because I don't think San Diego had a very good defense yet. But Tomlinson was unstoppable. He reminded me a lot of the early days of Curtis Martin at Pitt when he was just kind of the only guy out there doing his thing. It was unbelievable. The Steelers couldn't stop him. He was that good. So that was at least fun for us, in kind of a downer season. As far as the problems with the team, part of the problem was the defensive secondary. They still had Chad Scott, a safety named Brent Alexander, Dwayne Washington. Also, Kendrell Bell was a linebacker, and he wasn't very good at covering passes. But definitely Brent Alexander and Dwayne Washington were in downward slope of their career and not playing as well as they needed to be for them to win more than 6 games that year. Also, another issue was Tommy Maddox and Charlie Batch were the quarterbacks on that team. So they had kind of 2 journeymen, not really a top flight quarterback yet. And Tommy Maddox had a lot of turnovers that year, if I remember. I remember Tim calling him a turnover Tommy.
Yeah. He we did that podcast we did an episode about the 2002 season and sort of the magical run that they had under Tommy Maddox. So go back and listen to that if you haven't already. But one of the things we talked about in that episode was how their defense, the league had kind of shifted. The league had been this run-heavy league. You had, in the late 90s, you had like Terrell Davis and Barry Sanders had 2,000-yard rushing seasons. And then in the early 2000s, the best players were then, starting to be the guys like Peyton Manning and Tom Brady and Steve McNair. And the league had kind of shifted, and the Steelers' defense was not built for stopping the pass. And so that whole 2002 season was a disaster on defense, but it was kind of masked by the fact that we could score a lot of points on offense. And I think what happened in 2003 was Tommy Maddox kind of came back to reality of being a veteran, kind of has-been quarterback. And so now the defense is still hemorrhaging points, but the offense can't keep up the way they could the year before. And that just led to a very miserable season, as you said, Steve.
So on that, Kevin Colbert and I guess Cowher and the other rest of the scouts got together and they decided to turn over the roster. So Jerome Bettis was fading. He had some injuries. He was still an effective running back, but he wasn't definitely the feature running back that he could be. So they signed a guy from the Eagles called Deuce Staley, who was a big free agent that year. But the biggest addition was in the draft, where they drafted Ben Roethlisberger with the 11th pick in the draft. Even though they drafted him, they were going to sit him for a year and let him learn behind Maddox and Batch so he didn't get thrown into a bad situation and maybe ruin him for his career. The rumor has it on draft day that Bill Cowher wanted to draft another offensive lineman, but Dan Rooney, who had gone through the whole Dan Marino debacle, decided that this time he was getting his quarterback, and that guy was going to be Ben Roethlisberger. So he put his foot down and told the coaches. The owner kind of stepped in and made definitely what in hindsight was definitely a right call there.
That was a big deal. I think my whole lifetime as a Steeler fan, the last time they drafted a quarterback in the first round before that was 1980 when they drafted Mark Malone, and they didn't really even draft him to be anything other than Terry Bradshaw's, one-time successor, and they had won the Super Bowl the year before, so he was the last pick of the first round. So they never really invested in skill positions in high picks. And it just, Steve, did you ever watch The Wonder Years?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was an episode of The Wonder Years where they need a new car, and they go to the car dealership, and the dad in the Wonder Years is very like old school, prudent, so he's looking for like a used car, something very economical, and there's this like shiny Mustang convertible.
I remember this episode.
Yeah, and the kids are all like, "Oh, let's get the convertible, and the dad's actually thinking about it. And then of course in the end he doesn't. But that was like this draft. It's like the Steelers under Noel and then even under Cowher, it was just like they always did the prudent thing, right? The prudent, responsible thing. They never went for the shiny convertible. And it was like in 2004 when that pick was on the clock, and Ben was still sitting there because that was after the whole drama with Eli Manning and Phillip Rivers and the trade. And then Ben's still sitting there. Cleveland passed on him, all these other teams that were potential for him to go to. And you're like, come on, Dad, don't get the station wagon, get the shiny convertible. And it was so cool that they actually did that. And it was so different from what they normally did. And like you said, I think Dan Rooney, that was a lot of his influence for sure, because Cowher wanted Sean Andrews and Cowher wanted the station wagon.
Yeah. Well, I guess, I don't know if it's like, I was thinking about this, maybe coaches get scared because, not scared, but like they just don't want to be hassled with, if you draft a high draft pick, like especially quarterback, all the questions all the time are going to be, when are you starting him? When is he going to play? What is the plan? It's just going to be constant, distraction. And, if anything, coaches don't like distractions. And I think a lot of coaches view that like a high quarterback draft pick as a distraction. And I mean, there was still, if you watch there's a whole NFL Films thing on that draft. Like if Eli Manning, wouldn't have gone to the Giants, they were going to take Ben Roethlisberger. So, I mean, the Steelers were really kind of lucky, and Cleveland passing on him to take Kellen Winslow. I mean, Kellen Winslow was a decent player, but he's not Ben Roethlisberger, So, I mean, boy, things could have been a lot different. Maybe Cleveland has a Super Bowl and a NBA championship, and the Steelers don't have anything, The ball really fell in their court, and kudos to the Steelers for taking advantage of it.
Yeah. Ernie Accorsi was the general manager of the Giants, and he flat out said that. He said if that deal would have fell through for Eli, because the Chargers had drafted Eli and were trying to trade him, he said, I just would have taken Ben because that's the other guy I wanted. And so, yeah, at that point, either the Steelers end up with Rivers or they take another position. Who knows what happens at that point, but history could have been very, very different.
Well, you wonder, I mean, if they would have had the success with Rivers. Rivers isn't a bad quarterback. I mean, he's just been kind of on a so-so team, so I don't know.
Yeah. And Rivers was supposedly, Cowher went to NC State and had a lot of ties to NC State, and Rivers was an NC State guy. So there was rumors that that's who the Steelers, if the Steelers were going to take a quarterback, they were going to take Rivers. But then once he was gone via the trade to the Chargers, then it was kind of up in the air whether or not they were going to go after a quarterback. And going back to the 2003 season, the very last game of that season was against the Baltimore Ravens in Baltimore. And Baltimore had won the division that year, and they clinched everything. They clinched the division, and they were going to have to play the following week in the wild card round. But Brian Billick, their coach, chose to play most of their starters. They were trying to get Jamal Lewis, the running back, they were trying to get him a 2,000-yard season, which he accomplished. And they ended up beating the Steelers in overtime in Baltimore. And if the Ravens don't start their starters in that game, or if they sort of take the gas or foot off the pedal there a little bit, and it's just, if the Steelers win that final game of the 2003 season, then Buffalo jumps ahead of the Steelers on the draft picks. And Buffalo ended up drafting J.P. Lossman, the fourth quarterback of that round, who turned out to be a total bust. And maybe Buffalo gets Roethlisberger. So there's so many little things that had to happen for things to fall in place for the Steelers to have that pick. And as miserable as that 2003 season was, and especially as miserable as that last game in Baltimore was, I think we were all watching that together.
Josh Miller threw a touchdown pass.
Josh Miller, a punter, that was our only touchdown, threw an 81-yard touchdown pass. But it was a miserable game, losing to Baltimore. But again, if you don't lose that, we maybe don't have Roethlisberger. So it's just funny how you look back at these things and how history could have turned out so different.
And I think too, I think the J.P. Lossman pick kind of illustrates how much of a crapshoot a first round quarterback can be. I mean, Buffalo obviously thought he was worth a first round pick.
Well, it's funny. We're recording this around the time of the 2020 NFL draft. And one of the things that struck me as I was watching it this year was that all the top picks, especially the quarterbacks, all those guys that are doing the analysis, they just gush. Oh, look at his arm. And they show these highlights of these guys throwing these 40-yard, perfect on-the-money passes in college. So it's like every top 10 pick, top 15 pick, they look like a surefire or superstar. But we know from history that, maybe half of those guys actually pan out. And maybe only...
even to have a Phillip Rivers type career,
Yeah. There's so many busts. So 2020, you had Joe Burrow was the number one pick. You had the kid from Alabama. You had the kid from Oregon. You just have these quarterbacks that just look, again, all the highlights are just wow, this guy is just going to be amazing. And then you just never know how that's going to pan out. And that 2004 draft, Eli and Ben won Super Bowls. Rivers had a pretty productive career. Lossman did nothing. So it's like those guys, if you go back and watch the television broadcast of that, I'm sure all four guys are being gushed over as can't miss. But man, I'm glad we had Ben. I'm glad we ended up with Ben.
that worked out for us. Also, not to gloss who we picked up Max Starks in the third round. So he ended up being a starter for years for us. So that was another, productive draft pick for us. The next point, Bill Cowher. He was kind of getting a rep of a Marv Levy or a Marty Schottenheimer or Bud Grant, a guy who had won a lot of games in the regular season, but hadn't had much success in the playoffs. So, and he also never won a Super Bowl. So it was probably that was probably a reputation that was starting to kind of attach itself to Bill Cowher. Part of the turnover was there was some coaching turnover. Like you said, defensive coordinator Tim Lewis didn't seem to be able to adjust to the new pass-happy NFL, and he was fired. And so they brought back Dick LeBeau, who had been there previous, and he was actually made defensive coordinator. Jason Gilden and Dwayne Washington both left the team for free agency. I believe they both went to Jacksonville. Also, Josh Miller, he left for New England in free agency. He never really got along with Bill Cowher for whatever reason, just personality clash. But they always, for some reason, I don't know, Bill always had a thing for punters. He just would always argue with his punters. Not sure why, but that's what he went with.
Yeah, and Gilden at this point was a little bit past his prime, but he was the Steelers' all-time sack leader, I believe, when he left. So he had been a very productive player, and I think they let him go because they had this young linebacker named Joey Porter.
Joey Porter, yeah.
Yeah, who they thought, could potentially step in and take his place, and then ended up being a good decision.
On the punter front, they actually signed Chris Gardocki, who had given Cowher the finger in a game when he played for Cleveland. So I guess, he may be just like somebody you could argue with on the punter front there. So that brings us to the start of the 2004 season. Kind of a strange start to the season. They played the Raiders and they beat them 24-21. They had held a lead for a very sizable lead. I think I went to this game too. For most of the game, but the Raiders mounted a late comeback, which had been kind of like apropos against our defense for the last couple of years since they couldn't stop the pass. Jeff Reed kicked the late field goal to seal the win. Jerome Bettis had that crazy fantasy football. He's the original fantasy football poacher. His stats for the game were 5 rushing attempts for 1 yard and 3 touchdowns. And meanwhile, poor Deuce Staley just had 91 yards rushing. So if you drafted Deuce Staley, you were probably not very happy with Jerome Bettis or Bill Cowher or the Steelers if you're a fantasy football person. Another great moment I remember was Casey Hampton, who I feel does not get, I don't know why he doesn't get any credit in the national media, why they all fall over him for Vince Wilfork. Vince Wilfork on a good day is maybe half as good as Casey Hampton was in his prime. Casey Hampton's a far superior nose tackle, always was. I remember this play against the Raiders that kid, Justin Fargas, Huggy Bear's kid, tried to block him, and he literally put his hands on his helmet and leapfrogged him, jumped over him to tackle they were running like a wide receiver thing, and he tackled the guy like outside the numbers, which is unbelievable. And I don't think Vince Wilfork ever did that, or Ted Washington, or any of those other big nose tackles that they always love to trot out that they think are so great. But so they win the first game of the season. It's kind of weird. The Raiders weren't really that great, but a win is a win. So the next day.
Yeah, Steve. So that game, you're right. That was the Bill Callahan Raiders era after he had taken them to the Super Bowl, and then they completely fell apart. And it was kind of like, okay, this is one of the really bad teams, so we beat them. So maybe if we could just beat the bad teams and maybe play okay against the good teams. I think at this point in the season, there's not a whole lot of optimism, right? And you're playing against the second week. You're playing at Baltimore against the team that won the division last week or the previous year. So, if you can't play well against them, then you're probably headed for another mediocre season, is what everybody's probably thinking in their heads.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. Was they go into Baltimore and disaster strikes. They lose to the Kyle Boller quarterback Ravens. With Kyle Boller at quarterback, the Ravens score 30 points on the defense and win 30-13. But more like relevant to the rest of the season is Tommy Maddox gets hurt. He gets hit in the elbow, his throwing elbow, and he's going to be out for a couple of weeks. His arm was actually in a sling. Ben does come in, and he throws a couple touchdowns. I wouldn't say they're complete garbage time, but he does throw a couple of interceptions too. He just kind of looked like a rookie that was out there just kind of winging it around, doing his best to, in a bad situation because they were already down a lot of points by the time Ben got in. But at that point, it seemed like the season, like you said, was heading down the same 2003 season where they were just kind of get another 6 or 7 wins at best and probably not have too much success.
Well, and I remember the 03 season, one of the big topics on like local sports talk radio by the time we got into like middle of November was, hey, it's a lost season. Why don't you play the young guys? Why don't we play some of these backups? Let's see if somebody else can step in. And Cowher didn't really like to do that a whole lot. I mean, he mostly stuck with the guys that he had. And, I think also with coaches, they know if a guy's doing well in practice or not. They know if they deserve to play or don't. And I think when this happened with Maddox, and now they're 1-1, it's like, okay, they got blown out in Baltimore. To me, at least the way I was feeling at the time was, okay, well, good. Now the rookie gets to get some playing time. We're not gonna win any games, but he'll get to get some playing time, and then maybe a year or two from now, he'll be ready to do something significant. Well, I never in a million years thought that would lead to what it led to.
I wanted to see what he got because I didn't really know much. And he came out of such a small school. I think sometimes when a quarterback comes out of like that MAC, like it's tough to tell like how good you really are. Like JP Losman, I think went to Louisiana Tech is the same kind of thing. It's like, yeah, he was good, but what kind of competition was he playing against? And, is his skills going to fit into an offense that this team is running? So it was kind of just curiosity factor on my part. During that week, Alan Faneca made the news because he said some quotes that weren't probably flattering to Ben, but they were definitely, I would say this is the attitude of the other veterans on the team. Somebody asked him if he was excited to be playing with a rookie quarterback. And he stated, exciting? No, it's not exciting. Do you want to go to work with some little young kid who's just out of college? Everybody's got to do a little more. Everybody's got to help out to do a little more, do a little extra, take that extra step, put the extra work in this week and rally around him and help him out. It's a learning process for him. He's a number 1 pick. He's fresh out of college, and that's the big thing. He's thrown in a new offense. He's not in that Miami, Ohio offense that he sat in for 3-4 years. He has to learn that too. So there's a lot to soak in. And it's like every play you get better, you see things, you start to realize things, how a play works, how defense reacts to it. It's just a process. But mainly the first part of the quote, I put the second part in there just to be fair to Alan Faneca, but the media would never play that second part. They would always play the first part where, Alan Faneca doesn't like Ben. No, he doesn't want Ben to play, and
Yeah, I always thought that was unfair to Faneca because, I mean, heck, even in my job, I remember when I came out of college in my job, I'm constantly asking people like, hey, how do I do this? Where do I send this? How do I, you're new, you don't know exactly what you're doing. Everybody else has to do more to help you. It's a natural feeling, and it wasn't like Ben had earned the job or had been anointed. It was because of injury. So I don't know. It was a natural reaction, and it just anytime you get annoyed with athletes giving vanilla, boring answers, this is why.
Yeah, because it really got. I remember just like the whole week that was really a big thing, and that was before like the media was really crazy like it is now, like on Twitter.
Oh yeah, that was before social media. So yeah, but you still had sports talk radio, and you still had a lot of people like, oh, now there's dissension in the locker room and blah blah blah. So again, like I said, to me there wasn't any optimism for this season at this point.
Yeah,
there was zero optimism.
And so the next game, they were scheduled to be played on a Sunday in Miami, but they had to delay it to Monday night because there was Hurricane Janine. And they still, like, the hurricane had kind of, I guess, gone through enough to where they could play, but there's still like all the rain left over from it. So it was a complete monsoon. The team said they bonded on this road trip because I guess they had to sit in the hallway of their hotel because it was too dangerous to sit in the room on that Sunday. So this is part of like the team kind of coming together and, an unexpected bonding experience. So also they played the Dave Wannstedt was the coach of the Dolphins. Very sloppy weather conditions. They still played baseball at Pro Player or whatever. I guess it's Hard Rock Stadium now, but it's Pro Player Stadium back then. It's the same stadium. But there was dirt infield, and with all that rain, it was just like playing in a bunch of mud. Ben threw an interception on his first pass. He did that a lot that year. Like his first couple passes, he would throw an interception. I don't know if that's like a rookie thing or just something Ben had to kind of work his way through. But in spite of all that, the Steelers defense won 13-3. And like you said, the Dolphins weren't considered a good team that year. They were mediocre at best. I don't even know, was Fiedler was probably still their quarterback, or, it wasn't.
It wasn't Dan Marino. That's what you can say about the Dolphins of the 21st century. It wasn't Dan Marino.
Yeah. So, I mean, a weird kind of game, but they won it, and now they're 2-1, and they kind of went through some adversity there. I got through the week and with a hurricane and some mud. Now they're heading into the next week is against the Bengals, who are improving themselves. The Bengals now have Carson Palmer and some other key pieces, and they were a pretty decent team. I remember the big difference in this game is the Steelers had taken a lead. And normally, like, it was like one of those 3-point leads. Like, teams had just been able to drive down on our defense and kick a field goal or score a touchdown and win the game. But the difference was this time we had Troy Polamalu. And Troy Polamalu made a great play, picking off Carson Palmer late in the game. And then on his way to the end zone, actually running over Carson Palmer to score the game-clinching touchdown, which was at that point, I knew this team was better than 2003 because that was a play that had not been made in a couple of years, where like a clutch play by the defense. I hadn't seen that in a while from the defense. I thought the team showed me something that week. I didn't know how far they would go, but I thought they would at least probably make the playoffs now, especially that was a big divisional win against the Bengals.
Yeah. It was also a breakout moment for Troy because it was his second season. And he had played sparingly in his rookie year. He'd kind of gotten in more at the end of the season, but he did not look – he was not the Troy Polamalu that we all know and love, right? He looked kind of lost in the secondary. And now Dick LeBeau is there, and Dick LeBeau always geared his defenses around the safety position and gave Troy a lot of freedom, started giving him more and more freedom. And now you start to see, like, boy, this guy's really an impact player. And just that image of him running over his college roommate Carson Palmer, that was like you said, sort of a signature moment in the season. Like, hey, we might have something here.
Yeah, especially like I've always heard it takes 3 years for a player to really show you what they have. You figure this is really like year 1.5, or like, it's still kind of his rookie year because, like you said, he'd been hurt his rookie year, and so he was still developing, I would say that, and definitely had not reached his full potential. But they definitely were showing some signs. Let's see. The next week, the Steelers beat Cleveland at home, and they kind of go to this formula that's kind of, like you said, it's a pass-happy league, but it's kind of out of vogue at the moment. They run a lot with Deuce Staley and Jerome Bettis, like heavy power running game. And then Ben can go play action, and the defenses are simpler to read, or you can throw them first down when the defenses play more vanilla to stop the run. So they're kind of protecting Ben, and their defense, like we said, is rounding into shape. The defense is starting to get good, and they're starting to be able to defend the pass. So the Steelers win at home against Cleveland, who was not that good, 34-23.
The thing I remember, I was at that Cleveland game, and the thing I remember the most about that was the first game that Ben started where they really took the handcuffs off of him a little bit. And he threw some nice, like, deep balls. I mean, he really looked like he could play quarterback at that point. He wasn't just managing the offense. I mean, if you look at like the season that we had recently where Duck Hodges came in, and we were winning some games with Duck Hodges, but man, they were not letting him do squat, because they were terrified of letting him throw anything more than 5 yards down the field. And I feel like they had done that a little bit with Ben at first, like in the rain in Miami and even the Cincinnati game. But this was the first time that they kind of let Ben have some freedom, and he started to show that he, maybe wasn't going to take 3 or 4 years to develop.
I think, too, with the running game, it makes things a lot easier for a quarterback. A good running game and a defense, you don't have to be the greatest quarterback in the world. And like I said, they're not asking him to go 5 wide and throw the ball 40 times. If you look throughout the season, he mostly averages like 20, 25 passes. So that was kind of their formula. After that, they have a big test. The next 3 teams are very good teams. That's the Cowboys, Patriots, and Eagles. And the Cowboys are on the road, but the Patriots and Eagles are at home. And I think these games define this season. And this team showed the promise of what was going to be. And you didn't know it at the time, but this is really, after these 3 games, it's unbelievable. It's a great run, and it's a great run. So the Steelers go to Dallas, and they play from behind for most of the game. Let's see here. And then but Ben, he plays well in Dallas, and he leads 2 fourth quarter drives. and Jerome Bettis runs in with 30 seconds left. Then the Steelers win 24-20. And it was a good play, a good win by the Steelers on the road against a good Dallas team. Unfortunately, Casey Hampton tore his ACL and was done for the season. But they had a guy, Chris Hoke, who came in and did an admirable job, played well for the rest of the season. A really big win on the road for the Steelers there.
It was a little bit of a miracle win too. So the quarterback for the Cowboys at this point is Vinny Testaverde.
They always had good success against him, yeah.
And yeah, Vinny Testaverde still probably goes to bed with nightmares about playing against the Steelers. To some of his worst moments came against the Steelers when he was the quarterback of the Browns and the Ravens and now the Cowboys. They had the lead and they had a third down around midfield, and they could have tried to run the ball and then punt. And Parcells was their coach, and Parcells elected to try to throw a pass because if you convert the first down, then the game's over. And Testaverde dropped back, and he was standing right on the star in the middle of the field. And he got hit, and he fumbled. And I think it was Kimo von Oelhoffen picked up the ball and ran it back to like the 10-yard line. And that's how the Steelers won. But they had the game over, and Testaverde fumbles the ball to the Steelers. So it just was like, wow, is this season might have some magic to it.
And definitely like the team's playing well, like good defense, and even Ben, that game threw a couple touchdowns. They're definitely, you can tell there's something different than there was the last 2 years. They're definitely a better team.
But the next two games, like you said, Steve, I mean, that was a big win on the road against a good team, but the next two teams are undefeated.
Yeah, and so they play the bye week and they win against the bye week. And the next game is on. It's a weird game. It's like one of those Sunday 4:00 games, and it's on Halloween versus the Patriots. And the Patriots have like this 21 game winning streak, and they won the Super Bowl the year before, and they're one of the better teams in the NFL, if not the best team in the NFL. And it's pretty hard to argue against that at this point. Well, after an early Vinatieri field goal, Deshae Townsend picked off Brady in one of Brady's few bad games against the Steelers. He scores a touchdown. I remember Ben went deep to Burris because they were doing, because Belichick sold out against the run. They were able to kind of expose the Patriots defense a little bit because they were able to throw deep, on early downs, and they scored. They jumped out to like a 21-point lead. One of my favorite memories is in the second half when the Steelers were still up by a fair amount. Deuce Staley had gotten hurt, but Bettis was in, and Bettis breaks through the line and is running, and he has like a choice to like go out of bounds or like run over Rodney Harrison. He just literally can see his head turn, like, where's 37? Where's 30? And he like literally just runs at a beeline, like gives up like a 10-yard gain just to totally splatter Rodney Harrison, which was good for Jerome. I gotta love that. Another big thing I remember after this win, they won 34-20 in very convincing fashion, was, oh my goodness, I have never heard so many excuses from New England in my life. Well, we didn't have Deion Branch. We didn't have Corey Dillon. Wah, 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 boo-hoo, close the bridges in Boston. I was just a bunch of Boston whining. I've never heard Patriots fan whine like that. I ain't ever since. It was just such a joke. It just, but another reason to, that's why it's a rivalry and nobody likes the Patriots. But we got them that day. It
was one of the few times that a Steeler coach outcoached Belichick. It just, the Steelers dominated. It was so rare. Like you said, the Patriots hadn't lost a game in like a calendar year, and here the Steelers are dominating them. And yeah, the Boston fans, I mean, that was right around the time the Red Sox were winning their first World Series since 1918. So you'd think they would have been happy, but they kind of, I think they kind of were lamenting the fact that they couldn't do the woe is me routine as much anymore.
Yeah, it was. It's always fun to beat the Patriots, but almost as fun as it is to beat the next team on our list here. So the next, it's another week, another undefeated team, and another Super Bowl favorite. The Eagles were really good that year, and so they came into town. This at least the game's at home against Philadelphia, and I mean literally, this game wasn't even a game. The Steelers blew them out. They won. What the final score was 27-3. Hines Ward scored on like a reverse. I don't remember how good of a bad game Ben had, but they ran the ball really well. And they totally shut down Donovan McNabb and Terrell Owens, so much so that, like, the one thing that most people remember from this game is, like, Terrell Owens chasing Donovan McNabb around the sidelines and yelling at him. And, like, Donovan McNabb is considered, like, a kind of a stand-up guy, not like a jerk or anything. So kind of like in Terrell Owens is the opposite. You know, I guess this is before Owens was working out in his driveway. But yeah, so now at this point, they've won 3 games and beaten 2 teams who are undefeated, and another Dallas that's probably a playoff team.
So Steve, you mentioned you mentioned the running in this game. So this game really, Deuce Staley had been very effective. He really had been. It was like, wow, that was a good signing. This Deuce Staley guy is going to be really good. And then he was hurt, and then he was basically hurt for like the rest of his time in Pittsburgh. This really kicked off the Deuce Staley wearing sweatpants on the sidelines era.
Well, yeah, and I always blame. I think Belichick put out a bounty on him, quite honestly, because like he got hurt in like some mysterious scrum in that New England game, and it wouldn't surprise me if he got away with that, because Ray Lewis got away with that with Mendenhall. That was back in the day when, you know, you get away with crap like that.
Yeah, that was before the Saints did it, and it was bad.
Yeah.
The Bettis, I think, you know, everybody remembers Bettis. Bettis was the Hall of Fame running back. He was the bus. You know, in 2003, and then coming into the season, the reason they went out and signed Deuce Staley is because Bettis was done. I mean, he was finished. Like, if we're really being honest, he was finished, and they were keeping him on the team as like a short yardage back and as a character guy. Nobody expected him to be anything more than that. He was done. And when Deuce Staley got hurt and they had to start Bettis in this game, I was tailgating before this game, and there was a guy I was tailgating with, and he was just complaining about Bettis. Bettis sucks. He's no good anymore. And I said, oh, come on, let's be optimistic. I bet Bettis has 150 yards in this game. And I said that totally joking, because I expected Bettis to do nothing. And he ended up having 149 yards in that game.
Should have put money on that.
And he ended up then becoming their starter the rest of the season, and then having a great season. It was pretty remarkable. And I'm not sure he makes the Hall of Fame. You know, like they always talk about Kurt Warner's in the Hall of Fame because he kind of had that second run with the Cardinals. You know, would he have made it with just that initial run with the Rams? I kind of feel that way about Bettis. Had Bettis faded and not done anything after 2002, you know, I don't know. But then he comes back in 2004, and he is just a monster. And then his last year, 2005, he's very effective also. So I just always wonder that, you know, had he not come back and had that sort of second wind. But he did. All the credit to him. None of us. I certainly did not think he had anything left, and I was kind of upset that he was now the starter until this game, and then it was like, oh, maybe he's still the bus.
I think too the Steelers started to realize that, and it's kind of like commonplace now in the NFL, that you can't just make it through the season with one running back. They take too much of a beating. You almost have to have 2.
Yep.
So at this point, like I said, I realized the Steelers were the best team in the NFL. And at that point of being a Steeler fan, I mean, I'd only been a Steeler fan since '92, maybe not as long as other people. I can't remember ever being able to say that about the Steelers at any point in any season, where like it was undisputable. You couldn't argue it. If you argue it, you were just like trying to stir stuff up. They had literally beaten the two best teams in each conference and beat a really good team in the other one. Had only lost 1 game. I mean, it was just, I just knew that they were going to make, I just knew they were going to probably make the Super Bowl at that point. I thought, we're going to the Super Bowl, because, I mean, I can't imagine anybody's going to be able to beat this team.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. You know, because just 6 weeks before, you know, they're 1-1, they have to start a rookie. they're looking at another 6-10 or 5-11 season. To go from that to the undisputed best team in the league in such a short time, it was weird. It was like a dream because you didn't expect that. You
You
just
almost didn't want to believe. Yeah.
Yeah,
You're like,
I mean, the Patriots, the Patriots and the Eagles being undefeated. Well, the Patriots had won the Super Bowl the year before. The Eagles had been in the championship game 3 years in a row. So you expected those teams to be dominant, but the Steelers were not a team that you expected going into the season or even after week 3 to be anywhere near the top of the league. So it was remarkable. I don't have any better word than that.
They play the hapless Browns again. They beat the Browns 24-10. Jerome Bettis, like you said, is filling in for Deuce Bailey, who's now firmly in his sweatpants. And Bettis has 103 yards rushing against the Browns. Another great performance, and kind of the formula that's been going on is they run the ball effectively and just kind of pass when they need to and play really good defense. And that's kind of what's going on with this team, and they're now starting to kind of hit their stride. The next, they play the Bengals, another division foe. This is a tightly contested game. The Steelers would pull out this win late in the game, 19-14 on a pass from Ben to Dan Kreider. Does anybody remember having a fullback? And the defense clinched the game on a safety by Carson Palmer. A tough, hard-fought win, divisional opponent in Cincinnati, and another big win in the same kind of thing. They're not making mistakes that could kill you. And when they need to play, Ben is clutch. He's able to put a pass together when they need it, and that's kind of where the team is right now. Next, they play the Redskins, who were really bad that year, as they are most years. They beat the Redskins 16-7. Jerome Bettis runs for another 100 yards. And they're really rolling at this point.
Yeah, the formula, as you mentioned, it's run first, defense. But we did an episode about the 95 team that went to the Super Bowl. We talked about how Cowher always had that formula of run first, play some stout defense, and have a game manager quarterback. I think the difference this year was Ben. They had the running game and the defense, but Ben was more than a game manager. He wasn't, at this point in his career, he wasn't throwing for 5,000 yards or anything. But you mentioned his ability to make plays when they needed him to. He could do that. He was clutch. That ability to stay in the pocket, to get away from the first guy, to run. He was more mobile at this point in his career. He was just a playmaker, and it was different. It just felt different than anything the Steelers had ever had, certainly since the 70s.
Yeah, it's definitely different when you have like a quarterback that can make plays. And that's what he would do. He wasn't necessarily, like you said, a polished NFL quarterback where he was reading the defense and putting pinpoint passes in there. He would kind of when things would break down, he would do what he does best, and that's run around and make a nice pass for either a touchdown. There's a lot of highlights of him even that year, especially just kind of running around playing backyard football. So the next week, they go down to Jacksonville, and I think this was a Monday night or Sunday night game. Jacksonville had a bunch of former Steelers on their team. Ben actually had a perfect quarterback rating this game, and he led another late comeback, a big catch by Lee Mays. I know that's a Tim favorite. And they won 17-16 coming back again. So kind of 2 comeback wins in a row. I don't know. Jacksonville was kind of mediocre, maybe not that great.
That game was on a last. I think they won that game on a last-second field goal, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. And I mean, Jacksonville is okay. They're another kind of mediocre team. But still, like I said, those are games that they hadn't been winning in years past, and a lot of that was due to not just the defense, but Ben being able to make a play here when they needed it. So let's see. The next game is against the Jets, and the Jets have this guy. I mentioned him earlier. He's Curtis Martin, And this whole kind of season was kind of weird. Curtis Martin and Jerome Bettis kind of had like really close like career stats. So it seemed like every week one or the other would pass each other with like, all-time, as they both went up the all-time rushing list. It was kind of weird to have both in the same game at the same time. This is maybe the Steelers start to show a little bit of, I don't know, but maybe not fatigue yet, maybe a little later, but they win the game at home 17-6. Bettis had to throw, I think, a halfback pass for a touchdown in this game. I don't know how many he had in his career of those, but they did win the game 17-6. I'm not sure how well Curtis Martin did, but with six points, probably not that well. They probably shut him down pretty good.
And Curtis Martin was in his 10th year at this point, which is ancient for a running back. But he actually wins the rushing title this year, which is just a testament to how good Curtis Martin was. And Steve and I are biased. We're huge Curtis Martin fans from his days at Pitt. But man, winning the rushing title in your 10th year, again, that's why he's a Hall of Famer. But in this game, as you said, Steelers really minimized him.
And they had Pennington, and we'll talk about him later in the playoff game. But they had him, and I think we play to win the game guy was the coach, Herm.
Yeah, Herm Edwards. Yep. Yeah. Poor Herm Edwards. It's there's two things he'll be remembered for. One is picking up the Miracle in the Meadowlands football. That was him that scored the touchdown in the Miracle in the Meadowlands. And then as a head coach saying, you play to win the game. And that's all he'll ever be remembered for.
Yeah. The next week they played the Giants. And this is one of those games that they probably should have lost. And it was a showdown of first-round picks. Ben and Eli both have a high-scoring game. Ben actually has a great passing. Jerome Bettis, like you said, has 140 yards rushing. Jeez. And the Steelers win 33-30. Maybe the defense just took a week off that week or what, but I remember Eli shredded them pretty good. But the offense, this is kind of like the offense was able to bail out the defense in this one, which was another good sign that this team is just, they can win it different ways, you're thinking at this point.
Yeah, it's starting to become the team of destiny thing at this point because you can't win every game. And so the Jacksonville game, they kick a last-second field goal. The Giants game, they returned the opening kickoff for a touchdown. The Giants did, and it was just right from the start. It was like a shootout, and the Steelers eventually came out on top. And so you're just waiting for okay, it's a bad game, rookie quarterback, not a big deal. But you couldn't really afford to lose a game because New England still only had that one loss.
Yeah.
And so you're looking at the home field advantage for the playoffs, and if you lose one game, then you're behind New England for the number one seed. And so they kept winning.
Yeah, it was definitely like I remember that the whole year thinking, well, New England's got to lose a game eventually, and they just would win every week. It was a real interesting season that way. It's like the Steelers and New England were just definitely the best two teams in the AFC that year, and they definitely went like it was neck and neck the whole year. It was only one loss between the two teams. The next week was a rematch. I guess the only game they had lost that year to Baltimore. They did avenge it. When Ben had a solid game, throwing 2 touchdowns, and they won 20-7. So they beat Baltimore, but it's here at home, and Baltimore wasn't that good. They had Kyle Buller. How good could they really be? The more significant thing, like we were just saying, like what happened was the Patriots never seemed to lose, especially that season. Well, they went to Miami and played Miami, and late in the game, Manning throws a rare interception.
Brady.
That turns, did I say Manning? Brady throws a rare interception that turns the game for Miami, and Miami wins. And this kind of like, people forget this, but every year, like, it seems like New England loses one game to Miami that they shouldn't. And normally it's the one in Miami. And this is kind of when it started. So that was a big opportunity. It was now 14-2. and and now the Steelers had a 1-game lead on them and the tiebreaker because they'd beaten them in the regular season. So when they won that game against the Ravens, they locked up home field advantage, and that led into the last week of the season, which was a meaningless game against Buffalo. Which, and the Buffalo game is like, it's one of these memorable games because the Steelers like didn't do what Billick did the year before, where he played all his people. The Steelers legitimately rested like most of their starters, but you don't realize how good the depth of this team was until you hear, they're not playing Staley or Jerome Bettis. Oh, we got this guy, Willie Parker, who's our third string special teams player, who's a really good running back too. And I mean, they even played Brian St. Pierre, he wasn't anything special, and they had some guy on defense named, James Harrison, who Harrison had filled in a couple weeks earlier, I think, for Porter. Porter had been hurt, but Harrison had been playing well, and that was able to give the defensive the linebackers some rotation, so people weren't getting tired out as much. So the team was really, really good. So good, in fact, that they beat the Bills 29-24, and the Bills were either like an 8-8 or 7-9 team, and they needed to win that game to make the playoffs, and they ended up losing. So that was against, and Drew Bledsoe was their quarterback. It was just one of the more unbelievable things, like you said, team of destiny. I mean, that was wow. I couldn't believe that they were that good that year.
Yeah, I mean, and that was kind of a good launching pad, because those backups, you mentioned Willie Parker and James Harrison, they end up becoming important players in the upcoming seasons, and it was probably good for their careers to go out and prove that they could play against first string Buffalo team that had the whole season on the line and still win. And so with that win, that's their 15th win.
It's 15-1. Yeah,
15-1.
Yeah, there were 3 teams that had that. There was the Bears, which won the Super Bowl, Minnesota, which lost to Atlanta, and us. I think at that point there were only 3 teams.
There was one other. The '84 49ers were 15-1.
Okay.
Because I remember that because the only game they lost that year was against the Steelers. But the 49ers and Bears didn't win the Super Bowl. You mentioned the Vikings lost the championship game, but 15-1 was usually a pretty good sign that you were gonna win the Super Bowl.
And they had like weird stats like that, like yards per completion. Like if that's over like 10 or 12, which I think they were like 15, like that's like 80% chance you're going to win the Super Bowl or something like that. I mean, there were a lot of other like deeper stats I remember that were like this team, but that was, once again, that was a product of they'd run the ball, and then throw a deep pass. I mean, they were a really good team that year, and they were heading into the playoffs 15-1, home field advantage. Everything is looking pretty positive. There's no real reason to panic yet. So they take a week off. They get their first round bye, and the next game is against the Jets,
who had upset the Colts the week before. I think a lot of people were expecting the first game to be against Peyton Manning and the Colts, and I believe that's who the Jets had upset the week before. So it was kind of a surprise that's who they were playing.
Yeah, and once again, the Jets had Chad Pennington and Curtis Martin, pretty good defense, and unfortunately, Ben, like in the playoffs, he threw 2 really bad interceptions late in that game because one got returned for a touchdown, and then he threw another one that gave like the Jets, I think, a chance to kick a field goal. Well, the Jets had gotten into field goal range, and that's when Doug Bryan missed his first field goal. Then I think after that, they decided to be aggressive, and Ben threw another interception, and they were able to hold on, and Doug Bryan actually missed the second field goal. Back in the days when like kicking in, you got to remember, it was really cold that day. It was at night, and Heinz Field was really, really tough to kick a field goal in back then. There was a lot of wind, and the turf was bad. Ben played really bad. Chad Pennington couldn't throw a pass over 10 yards because his shoulder was messed up. A lot of people blame like Chad Pennington not having a better career because Herm Edwards just kept starting him, even though he was like almost he tore his rotator cuff and played that way.
Yeah, that was talk about team of destiny, right? So they're playing the Jets. Correction, the Jets had beaten the Chargers the week before, not the Colts. But Brian missed the first field goal with like 2 minutes left, and the game was tied. And that one hit the crossbar. So literally, if they would have been 1 yard like further, he would have made that.
Yeah.
It literally hit the crossbar, and then Ben throws a pick, and then they have an even easier field goal. And I was at that game, and I just remember kind of staring up into the sky. It was nighttime. It was freezing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you got to be kidding. Like, this season's going to end on a field goal in the first playoff game. We're going to go 15-1 and lose the first playoff game because the rookie quarterback finally realized he was a rookie and played terribly. And I could not believe he missed the second field goal. I really couldn't. I was in shock. And it went to overtime. And then the Steelers drive, and Jeff Reed has a 33-yard field goal, and he makes it.
Yeah, they definitely were very fortunate. Like, you don't ever like to admit when your team's lucky, but they were lucky. They should have lost this game.
Absolutely.
Ben played horrible. I remember somebody the next day put Doug Bryan on eBay, and like the winning bid was like 10 cents. So poor Doug Bryan. I mean, like I said, Heinz Field was a really tough place to kick, especially back then. And 47 yards and 43 yards aren't exactly gimme field goals. They're lucky,
but missing both of them. I mean, it's just so New York Jets.
Yeah.
Like, to miss both those kicks with the season on the line. And
you start to think, like you said, like it's team of destiny. Like, oh man, if this is gonna happen, they're definitely gonna, they got lucky. Now they just gotta not get lucky,
Well, and then it's like, okay, we hadn't lost since the second week of the season, and we had a rookie quarterback, and eventually we were going to lose a game, or he was going to play badly. So that happened, but we got out of it, right? So now we can go and win the Super Bowl because we got our bad game out of our system. That was what you were trying to convince yourself of, rather than, maybe this is going to be a pattern for the next week.
Yeah, unfortunately, it was the latter. It was a pattern for the next week. It's a rematch against the Patriots, who are 14-2, which is like a really good record for a team that has to go on the road. Like, normally 14-2 is you're at home. But that's the way this season was. And unfortunately, the Steelers just aren't up to the task. They just weren't ready for prime time. Ben, threw an early interception. The Patriots, I remember they stopped Bettis on a 4th and 1 early in the game, which was kind of a big play, and the Patriots took advantage. They threw deep a couple times and burned our secondary, and the game was 24-3 at the half. Now, if the defense maybe could have got it together and held in the second half, we at least would have had a chance, because the Steelers did score 24 points in the second half. But they didn't. They gave up a bunch more points. The Steelers would actually go on to lose 27-41. Burris dropped a 2-point conversion, which, I mean, I don't know if that really would have got them that much closer. Ben played really bad. He played a little better in the second half, but the defense didn't do much to help him in the second half. If you only give up one touchdown. They were down by 2 touchdowns most of the game, so it probably wasn't as close as I thought it was. And this is probably one of the bigger games that the Steelers have lost. This is one of the, outside of the Super Bowls, I would say this is probably the most disappointing loss I've ever experienced with the Steelers, because I really thought they would win. I really thought they would go in and stick it to especially the Patriots, who've been such a thorn in their side. It would have been nice to win and stick it to them, but unfortunately it wasn't to be. I remember they clinched the game on a reverse play. I mean, maybe they were stealing the signs. I don't think so. I watched a replay of this game. Palomalo lined up in the same spot 3 plays in a row. I think they finally just caught on to it. That was leads us to the aftermath.
Well, so just just
Yeah.
on that Patriots game, Steve, I agree. It was really disappointing. You know, they'd beaten the Patriots earlier in the season, convincingly at Heinz Field. And, you know, you just really convinced yourself like this is our year. We're going to do this, and we're going to play the Patriots and Eagles again, because the Eagles were going to be the NFC rep in the Super Bowl, right? So you're going to have the same two teams. You're going to beat them again, and this was going to be the greatest Steelers season of all time. And instead, it was the Patriots doing what the Patriots do best, just surgically dismantling a team, you know, and that's what they did. They just totally picked us apart. And Belichick rarely ever loses to the same team twice in the same season. And
they scored 41 points. This wasn't a defensive genius masterpiece by Bill Belichick in any way, shape, or form, because the Steelers did score. Like I said, they did score 27 points.
Yeah.
And normally that year, if they scored 27 points, 9 times out of 10, I bet they won.
Yeah. But a lot of it was, like you said, it was after 24-3. It was maybe the Patriots were playing a little bit of prevent and stuff like that. It just never felt like it was anywhere close. Like right from the get-go, it was just over.
Yeah, they always like the Harrison, where he threw the interception to Harrison early. They always people always say that's kind of where the Patriots pulled away and never really looked back.
Yep, and the Patriots, you know, that kind of cemented them as an all-time dynasty team. You know, anybody that doubted that at that point, I mean, that just cemented their status.
I would put this game up there with Sid Slid and you know, just some of the other. I mean, this is one of the most disappointing losses in Pittsburgh sports history, quite honestly. It really is. Yeah,
it was very disappointing. I won't spoil what you're going to talk about with the aftermath, but you know, to me, it's not as high for me only because of what happened the following season.
Yeah.
And then also, like, if you're going to lose, I'd rather lose 41-27 than, you know, Sid Bream sliding into home plate, or Dennis Gibson knocking down the pass at the last second, or Neil throwing the interception in the fourth quarter. You know what I mean? So I'd rather. It wasn't like it was a very disappointing, heartbreaking loss, but it wasn't like a dramatic last second. You kind of had lots of time to prepare yourself, because right from the get-go, it was pretty obvious New England was a better team.
Okay, some of the aftermath. The Steelers, like we said, still would have had to beat the Eagles in the Super Bowl, and they were really good too. So I don't know if the Steelers would have been able to pull that off again. They would have beat the same two teams they beat in the middle of the season, and both those teams were pretty good. I'm not sure what the Eagles' record was, but I know they hadn't lost too many games either. I would say this is probably one of the best playoff fields in NFL history. I mean, between the Steelers were really good, the Eagles were really good, and the Patriots were. That's probably like I think that Patriots team was the best Patriots team they ever had. I mean, out of all their teams that have won, I would, you know, probably even better than the undefeated teams, since they didn't win a Super Bowl. But that team played some really stiff competition and came out on top.
Well, they had played. I had mentioned the Colts before. They had actually played the Colts the week before in the divisional round, which was a much tougher matchup because they were the number 2 seed. So they had to play the Colts. We had the good fortune of playing a much lower team, the Jets, and they beat Peyton Manning, and then they came and beat us, and then, you know, they beat the Eagles in the Super Bowl. So they definitely earned that Super Bowl win.
Yeah. That was I think the 2004 team. That's probably their best team ever. I would stack that against some of the super, maybe not the best, but one of the best teams. Let me backtrack that. Like, I wouldn't put them better than like the next season, Super Bowl 40, but I would definitely put them better than Super Bowl 43, like that team, or Super Bowl 9. I think this team was better than that. Also,
it just goes to show that you don't always win the championship in your best season. You know, the 93 Penguins, you know, we're eventually going to do an episode about them. You know, people always say that was the best Penguins team ever, and they didn't win the Stanley Cup. The 2007 Patriots, you know, they were better than this 2004 team. They went undefeated. They didn't win the Super Bowl. man, it's just funny in sports. It just sometimes that happens where you have one of your best years ever and you just don't win.
Especially, I guess, in one and done like playoff formats. It's
Right.
easier to do.
Yes.
Off the field stuff, Myron Cope retired after this game. He had been their longtime color announcer and pretty popular guy in Pittsburgh, and even done some well nationally. He had been sick the whole season. He had actually missed some of the Philadelphia game, I think, because he had fell in his shower or something, and they had to send somebody out to find him. His on-air performance was slipping, and it was just kind of one of those backstories of the season. It would have been nice to win the Super Bowl and Myron to be there and enjoy it, one last hurrah. Also, after the season, Jerome Bettis almost retired, but he didn't. That's more of a when we do Super Bowl 40 season. I guess we'll cover that. I said one of the most disappointing things, but the reason they lost, like I said earlier, they were a running team with a rookie quarterback. Most rookies don't play 16 games in college, never mind 2 to 3 games in the playoffs. And the defense gets better as you go. So the defense also was transitioning from Chad Scott to Ike Taylor. I think Ike hadn't developed quite to the player he ended up being, and Chad Scott was somewhat of a weak link. Troy Polamalu was healthy, but was still a young player that really was like year 1.5. He hadn't become, like you said earlier, the Troy Polamalu that was, so instinctive. And plus, he's playing with Chris Hope, who, I think sometimes, it takes a while to learn each other and, what moves you're going to make. So that's it. Ben, like you said, Ben ran out of gas. He got tired and just absolutely was horrible in the playoffs. The media tried to make this, like all through the CEO media, like the whole Al Faneca, they tried to make a whole thing with, is Ben wearing gloves? Is that effect? I don't think the gloves had anything to do with anything. I think Ben was just a rookie, and he just got tired and physically worn out and just didn't have it at the end of that year. The positive is I think this set this team up for the next decade to have all the success. We don't have the success without this season. This team kind of learned what it would take to get through adversity and stick together and eventually win the championships that they did win.
I think that's a good point. And, you look at the other 15-1 teams that before this and after this that didn't win the Super Bowl. You mentioned the 98 Vikings, the 2011 Packers, the 2015 Panthers. Some of those teams, that was like their one shot. That was their open window, and they didn't do it. And then they never really got back to the same point again after that, any of those teams. And the Steelers did. And I think that's important, an important distinction, because it really did set the table for what they would do in the coming years.
Yeah, like I said, it's kind of a bittersweet season. I honestly felt after they lost the game to the Patriots that I would never witness a Steelers Super Bowl win in my lifetime. And I honestly felt that way because I thought if you can't win with a 15-1 team where the backups are so good they can beat other teams, that are playoff teams, then when are you ever going to win a game, win a championship? And little did I know I would be rewarded the next year, but very disappointed. Like I said, same feeling as like when Sid Bream slid, or when Dennis Gibson knocked down that pass, or some of the disappointing things that had gone on since the Penguins had won the '92 Stanley Cup. Because really, there hadn't been a championship in Pittsburgh since '92.
Well, and for the Steelers, you and I were born in the mid to late '70s, and so we were babies when the Steelers were winning their third and fourth Super Bowl. We didn't get to, as fans, we didn't get to experience that, and we had waited for years and years and years, and all these good teams in the '90s, and all these, and now you had this 15-1 team. And I'm with you. I kind of felt that same, like the air just kind of let out. Like if you can't do it at 15-1, where you've beaten undefeated teams, you've won these games that you shouldn't win. When's it going to happen? Is it going to happen?
Well, like you said, there's other teams too where that was their one and only shot, which I guess speaks to the character of this team and how close knit they ended up being. And how well they ended up playing together.
Well, yeah, I mentioned Carolina. That's the last team to go 15-1. That was in 2015, and they lost the Super Bowl to Denver. And Cam Newton was their quarterback, and he famously kind of pouted after the game in the press conference and wouldn't dive on the fumble and all that. And that was it. Their window was shut. They haven't done hardly anything since then. And that could have easily gone the same way for this team, very easily, and it didn't.
Well, I hope you enjoyed our podcast. That's our coverage of the 2004 season, kind of a bittersweet one, but not as hard to swallow now, I guess, as we know the next chapter in the book and the rest of the story, I guess, as Paul Harvey had to say. Check us out on Twitter and our website, which is, Tim?
PittsburghSportsMemories.weebly.com. Like Steve said, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook under Pittsburgh Sports Memories. And please, whatever podcast service you're on, leave us a review. That's how you can help other people find us. And please, if you like what you hear, give us feedback and tell your friends.
Thanks for tuning in.